Welcome to Sola Church Online.
Good morning, everybody. So glad you're here. I'm Alan Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers. Together, we are planting a life-giving church in Santa Monica, California this fall, 2021. While waiting for LA County to reopen, we launched online. So we're glad that you're here. If you're watching on the Church Online platform, you can click invite in the chat feed to ask someone to join us.
And if you're watching on Facebook, you can share this to your timeline.
If you watch on YouTube, be sure to click subscribe so that you don't miss any new content coming out of Sola Church.
And Alan, we had quite the milestone this week, didn't we?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that we have yet to move to West LA. So we've been riding out COVID at a conference center in Murrieta, California. Our home church, Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa, has helped us and been behind this church plant by providing interim housing for us here. And so a year ago, I started making weekly trips to Santa Monica, spending a night, getting a couple days there, boots on the ground, and then, of course, the whole world closed. So this last week, I was able to make a trip, spend a night, get a couple of days. Was able to attend an outdoor, socially distanced gathering of Westside pastors. It was an amazing time of mutual encouragement and prayer. There are some great women and men leading churches on the West Side. Really, really exciting to be a part of that group of people. Yeah. And I was able to meet up with a launch team member that we had not yet met face to face. So such a great time, really excited about how much we're going to be able to accomplish in the weeks ahead. And of course, I should probably mention that when the school year ends in June, we hope to make that move. We hope to make that leap from the Temecula Valley area to the west side of LA. So, pray for us that God would open doors. If you know of anything or anyone, have any connections, hit us up, man. We're excited to see how God's going to provide for that.
Yeah, we're so excited to see what God is going to do, and He can do it.
That's right.
And with that, let's worship.
And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, your perfect love is casting out fear. And even when I'm caught in the middle of the storms of this life, I won't turn back. I know you are near, and I will fear no evil, for my God is with me. And if my God is with me, whom then shall I fear? Whom then shall I fear? Oh no, you never let go, through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go, every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. And I can see a light that is coming for the heart that holds on. A glorious light beyond all compare. And there will be an end to these troubles, but until that day comes, I live to know you here on the earth, and I will fear no evil, for my God is with me. And if my God is with me, whom then shall I fear? Whom then shall I fear? Oh no, you never let go, through the calm and through the storm. Oh no, you never let go, every high and every low. Oh no, you never let go, Lord, you never let go of me. all I need to do is worship. Lord, I will just bow down. No, I'm just gonna stay still.
So this is that time in the service when we worship with our giving. If you are our virtual guest today, please don't feel obligated to give. For those of us that think of Sola Church as our home church, this is an especially meaningful part of the service. So there's a link in the chat feed. If you click that, it will open another window so you won't miss anything. But of course, you can always go to our website, solachurch.life, and click Give. There, you'll have the opportunity to make a one-time tax-deductible donation or even to schedule a recurring donation. Right. For those who prefer PayPal, the email address is give@solachurch.life. Your generosity is making it possible not only for us to do church online each week, but it's getting us a step closer to launching in person in the fall. I mean, the truth is, the bottom line is, it takes a lot of money to launch a church. It just does. There's no way around that. And so it's exciting to see the launch budget growing, and we're confident that when the time comes, we'll have everything we need.
And speaking of launching in person, today is a startup party.
Yeah, that's right. So if you are in or near Santa Monica, we want you at a startup party. These fast, fun, 60-minute Zoom meetings are designed for you to get to know us, for us to get to know you, for you to hear a little bit of our story. It's so much fun. It's hard to describe. I mean, we have food delivered to your door. We've got games and giveaways, video elements. We cast vision for Sola Church. We lay out a timeline. And then you have the opportunity to fill out a digital response card indicating your level of interest going forward. So as Miranda said, we've got a startup party today at 4 o'clock. And if that doesn't work for you, the next one is Wednesday, May 5th at 6:30 p.m.
And to register for these startup parties, you go to solachurch.life, click Startup Party, and choose your date. Super simple, and we'd love to see you there.
Yeah.
And now, let's get into our time of teaching.
As 1 Samuel 17 opens, we see two mountains, and in between a valley, and in the middle a brook. On one side are the Philistines, and on the other side the Israelites. For 200 years they've been going at it, and things are about to get real. Last week we started a new message series called TAKEDOWN. This series is all about defeating the giants in your life. Now, what is your giant? Well, you deal with it by day and think about it at night. It could be that thing that makes you feel anxious or afraid, or that thing that makes you feel guilt and shame, so you hide it. Even that thing that makes you feel angry or defensive when it comes up or someone confronts you about it. These are the things that we just can't start or seem to stop. These are the dreams that have turned into nightmares. These are the goals that suddenly seem unattainable. The truth is, we all have giants in our lives, things that stand between what is and what could be, between who we are and who we're becoming, between where we are and where we're going, things that seem impossible to overcome. So what does the Bible say about defeating the giants in your life? Are you ready for a takedown? Well, going back to last week, we learned that your takedown can start today, even if the opportunity is small, and even if the obstacles are big. Even if the opportunity is small, that even small steps can make a big difference. That today's obedience determines tomorrow's opportunities. That helping others with their giants helps us with ours. Even if the obstacles are big, we learned that left unchallenged, our giants will take over, so we have to take them seriously. That God is the only true giant in our story, and He's for us and not against us. That our focus determines our future. And so as we continue and get the next couple of points today, I want to say that your takedown can start today, even if the objections are loud. So look with me at the text beginning in verse 28. Now, Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David and said, "Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." And David said, "What have I done now? Is there not a cause?" Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing, and these people answered him as the first ones did. So I wonder how many people watching this online service had an older sibling who picked on them. I would ask you to say so in the comments section in the chat feed, but you might not do it because, well, you're afraid they would find out. I used to have a friend who lived across the street. He was a few years older than I was, and he had a brother who was a few years older than he was. So sometimes, he and I would be in the street, we'd be, throwing a football back and forth, for example, and here would come the older brother. Insert like Darth Vader music as he would make his way out of the house and in our direction. I mean, he struck terror in our hearts. It was terrifying. Have you ever felt like that? I mean, if so, then you know how David felt. By the way, if there are any young people watching for whom this is a present issue, it does get better. My friend and his older brother are besties now, but keep in mind, what doesn't kill you may leave a scar. Some people mean well, others mean no harm, and still others are just mean. It's not just that Eliab didn't get David, but it's like Eliab was out to get David. If you're going to defeat the giants in your life, don't expect everyone to be happy about it. Some may even be unhappy about it. In fact, here's a way to think about this. If you could think of who would be most impacted if you were to defeat your giant. Who would most be impacted or affected by you defeating this giant in your life? If from their perspective that's a bad thing, they're the ones that are going to be unhappy about it. It could even be a family member, and they can get loud. I remember a ministry trip I took some years ago to Europe. I actually led a team on a short-term mission trip to Austria, Hungary, and Serbia. And everywhere we went, we played live music and we did skate demos, would draw a crowd and would just share the message about Jesus, and people would respond. And I remember one teenager in Austria who actually came to faith and chose to become a follower of Jesus. That following Sunday, we did the service at the local church in this town in Austria. And afterwards, everyone was invited to a barbecue. And so this teenage boy was at this barbecue. And about halfway through, his parents showed up, yanked him out of that meeting. And we could see them actually striking him, actually beating him as they took him away. It was so upsetting. But it's an example. Now, something to keep in mind is that Eliab is projecting. He's looking at David and seeing what would be in his own heart if he were doing what David was doing or saying what David was saying. We need to be careful when we start making judgments about people or about being negative about them. Often our negativity says way more about us than it does about them. In fact, I think it was Eliab who wanted to be seen and so forth. David understood that if we're going to defeat the giants in our lives, we have to choose our battles. To ask ourselves, who's the enemy? For David, the enemy was not Eliab, but Goliath. If you're going to fight with your family, you're not going to take down many giants. It's going to be hard to defeat the giants in your life if you don't pick your battles, if you don't choose your battles. So picking it up in verse 31, it says, "Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, King Saul of Israel, and he sent for him. And then David said to Saul, 'Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine.' And Saul said to David, 'You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth.' But David said to Saul, 'Your servant used to keep his father's sheep,
And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defiled the armies, or defied, that is, the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So not only had David been misunderstood and misrepresented by his own family, but he'd been underestimated by his friends. And friends, too, can get loud. You know, it's funny how the things that people say to us stick with us and affect us in unexpected ways. I may have taught before about how, when I was in middle school, when I was like in 8th grade, a couple of friends told me that I walked funny. I didn't know I walked funny. No one had ever told me I walked funny. But from that point forward, it was something that I thought about. I probably started walking funny just because I was thinking about it. Then, many years later, I was walking through a parking lot and someone called after me, Alan, they called my name, and I turned around and it was this guy that I had gone to middle school and high school with. I hadn't seen him since. I was in my 30s by this point, living in an entirely different city. Never would have expected to see him. And you know what he told me? He told me that he recognized me from behind by my gait. You know what that means, right? By the way that I walked. So, sometimes the things that even friends say stick with us and weird us out. But it's not just friends, it's frenemies. I think about one man that I worked for who told me one time that I was bad luck. And I knew that that wasn't true. But there's something about it that still sort of stuck with me, that still sort of hovered over me. And then there's not just frenemies, but there are even enemies. Growing up, I can remember kids that hated me, that called me Rigg Pig, very creative. They clearly had a thesaurus and figured out that pig rhymes with Rigg. But Rigg Pig then became just pig. And then because people cannot help themselves, they have to add an S to my name. Like, it can't possibly be Rigg. It has to be Riggs. So too, pig eventually became pigs. And so people would greet me like that. Sup, pigs? I remember in grade school, I was the new kid once again. I was in the 5th grade and I was in my 4th school. And, I started getting picked on right out of the gate. And after backing out of a fight, I got labeled as a chicken. There were 2 classrooms that had kids, 5th grade kids in it, 2 5th grade classrooms. And I can remember that sometimes the teacher would send one of us to the other room for something. Once in a while, I would be that someone. And, when I would go to that room, I just dreaded it. Because as soon as I walked in that door, laughter would break out in the room. Kids would start making chicken sounds. That, again, is the sort of thing that affects you and that sort of hovers over you and sticks to you. Whether it's something that happened when you were a kid or something that happened when you were an adult, whether it's something that you're dealing with right now, we have to find a way to move past what they say. And listen, it's not just a matter of moving from what they say to what we say, because sometimes their voice has been in our head so long that it becomes our voice. We have to move from what they say and from what we may say to what God says. That soundtrack in our heads that says, I'm not enough, You know the one I'm talking about. That voice in your head that says you're not enough, that says that you're not tall enough, you're not thin enough, you're not handsome enough or beautiful enough, you're not intelligent enough, you're not educated enough, you're not trained enough, you're not experienced enough, you're not cool enough, you're not spiritual enough, you're not good enough. That voice, we have to change the soundtrack of our life from that voice to God's voice that says you are enough in Christ. As a follower of Jesus, you are enough. David might have been mad, when he was told he was too young, when he was told, in effect, that he was too little. I'm named for my dad. I'm a junior. So when I was a kid, I was little Alan. People would say Big Alan and Little Alan to differentiate. And I hated being called Little Alan. I mean, here I was knee high. I'm not little. and I can imagine David being like, hey, who are you calling little? But the cool thing is that no matter how loud the voices of his family or his friends got, David, he just had this quiet confidence. Now, maybe you've heard that chewing gum takes 7 years to pass through the human digestive system. Have you heard that? It turns out that that's not true at all. It is true that gum is indigestible, but it's not true that it takes 7 years to pass. How do I know? How does anyone know? Well, I mean, have you ever swallowed a coin? Like when you were a kid, did you ever swallow a coin? I did. Did it pass? Yeah. How do I know? How did you know? Well, I probably don't have to tell you. You probably know how I knew, and I know how you knew. But here's the thing about gum. It's said that criticism is like gum. Chew on it, but don't swallow it. Why? Because if you chew on it, it may help you, but if you swallow it, it may hurt you. So when it comes to criticism, chew on it, but don't swallow it. So listen, this is all about not being limited by how others may see us. David doesn't take it to heart, and he doesn't take the bait. He chooses his battles, the giant, not his brother. And he demonstrates grace and forgiveness. That's what we need to do. We need to learn to demonstrate grace. We need to learn to overlook a fault, a slight. We need to not feel the need to respond to every perceived wrong. To defeat the giants in your life, tune out the negative voices that say something other than what God says about who you are and about what you can do. Your takedown can start today, even if the opportunity is small. Even if the obstacles are big, even if the objections are loud. And then fourth, even if the outfit is different. Now, let me explain. To be clear, I'm not talking about clothes. On dictionary.com, that is the second definition of outfit. The first, well, an outfit is a collection of articles that equip a person for a particular task, role, trade, etc. So we're talking about being outfitted for something. Being outfitted for our battle against the giants. So look with me at verse 38. It says, so Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. Now, I don't know if we have any Iron Man fans out there. I've really enjoyed the Iron Man franchise. Those movies starring Robert Downey Jr. have been just a lot of fun. But like, what if you met Robert Downey Jr.? And what if he gave you the costume, the mask, and the gloves? I mean, like, I would totally be nerding out, wouldn't you? At the end of chapter 16, we learned that in addition to, being like a part-time musician for Saul, that David had also become Saul's armor bearer. It's in verse 21 of that previous chapter. So that means that he'd carried Saul's armor. This armor that he's now wearing, he'd carried it. So he'd handled Saul's helmet, Saul's coat of mail, Saul's sword, and so forth. And just like I described moments ago, no doubt David was totally nerding out, getting to wear this amazing armor. The problem is that David's not yet a full-grown man, and Saul, well, he was an unusually large man. Not Goliath big, but big. And so picture little David outfitted with Saul's armor. I mean, the helmet is like hanging over his eyes. The coat of mail that should go to David's knees is dragging on the ground. Nothing fits right. It didn't fit, and it wouldn't have worked. David wisely chose not to go along with it. And I think that this is a reminder of how much pressure we face, even from well-meaning people, to conform, to think like they do, to do things their way, even to try to be someone that we're not. And you know what? To take down a giant, you've got to be who you are. You've got to be who God made you. Don't try to be like, much less fight like, someone or something that you're not. And so David, he sheds the armor. We learn in verse 44 that he chooses instead the staff and the sling. Is there a giant in your life? That's what we're talking about in this series, right? I can't help but think about Romans 12, verse 2, which says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." We can either be conformers or we can be transformers. To take down the giants in our lives, we have to be transformers. And that means not conforming to the world around us. I think it's worth pointing out that in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 19, it tells us that there were no blacksmiths in Israel, that the Philistines had a monopoly on blacksmiths, that they even said, "Lest the Hebrews make swords or spears." So Saul's armor had not been made in Israel. It had to have been made in Philistia. It had to have been purchased at some point from the Philistines. So there's a powerful parallel here. Saul's armor that he's trying to push on David is actually Philistine armor. And I just can't help but think about how many times when we're facing a giant, the Word tells us to approach it one way and the world tells us to approach it another way. Now, what do I mean by the world? By the world, I'm just talking about culture minus God, like society to the degree that, to the extent that in the case where it's organized without reference to God, where God has just been left out of it altogether. And so when we conform to that, we're in trouble. So many times, even as people of faith, we're trying to wear the world's armor. We're trying to approach life the way everyone else does. We're trying to solve problems the way everyone else does, instead of even learning how God would approach that or how God would help us to deal with that. I love it. It's in another Bible book, but in the New Testament, in the book of Ephesians, the Apostle Paul is writing to the church in Ephesus, and he's just writing about how even physical giants, behind them is a spiritual reality. And he talks about how our realm, our armor that is in the spiritual realm. Let me just read a few verses, beginning in Ephesians 6, verse 14. "Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God." That's amazing that we have spiritual armor. In other words, we fight even physical battles with spiritual weapons. As followers of Jesus, we live in this world, but we live from a different place. We live from a spiritual place. And everything is different there. Everything is different in that spiritual place, even the weapons with which we fight. So another thing to think about is this, that at the same time that in some ways this represents doing things the way the Philistines would, it does also represent doing things the way Saul would, or the way anyone else in the Israeli army would have if they could have. And so here I want to caution something, and that is that not only when we're fighting giants, when we're trying to defeat the giants in our lives, when we're going for a takedown, here's the thing, we need to not only not do things the way everyone else does, the way the world does, the way those that don't take God into account do, but we may even need to do things differently than the way that other people of faith do. We may need to do things differently even than other followers of Jesus do. Sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that one size fits all, and we can learn a lot from each other. Man, it is so helpful when we share with each other how we've taken down giants, with God's help in our own lives. And sometimes learning what another person has done is so helpful, and we can try those same things and it works, but other times that's not the ticket for us at all. Other times God has a completely different strategy for us. I mean, just to give you an example that stands out in our minds right now, there's more than one way to plant a church. The way we're planting Sola Church in Santa Monica is completely different than the way that I planted Calvary Chapel in Austin, Texas 30 years ago. So, there are those people, there are those church planters, there are even those pastors who think that there's only one way to plant a church and any other way is wrong. I mean, even though the ways that we plant churches have changed over and over again, over 2,000 years of church history, and nobody's doing it exactly like Paul did it. So that's just not the case. It's not true at all. And so I think it's important to remember these things. Sometimes people talk about what we call our shape. The S stands for spiritual gifts. God's gifted us all differently. The H stands for heart. I'm passionate about one thing. You may be passionate about another. The A stands for abilities. You've got abilities that I don't have, but I've got some abilities that you don't have. We've got different personalities, right? I mean, very seldom do you meet someone who's just got your personality exactly. And we've all got completely different life experiences. And so no two people have exactly the same shape. No two people have all 5 of those things, totally in common with each other. So listen, whatever you're dealing with right now, whatever the giant in your life is, no one's ever been you before. No one's ever been in your exact shoes. No one has your shape. No one's come with your shape from your family of origin, is facing exactly the giant that you are and exactly the way that you are. Like, no matter how much we have in common, there are things that are unique about the combination of factors of what you're going through. So if no one's ever been you before, you've got to cut yourself some slack. And you've got to do you. With God's guidance, with the wisdom that He provides and the strength that He provides and the spiritual armor that He's given us, you've got to find your way through your valley in confronting your giant. So again, your takedown can start today, even if the opportunity is small, even if the obstacles are big, even if the objections are loud, even if the outfit is different. Listen, what stands between what is and what could be in your life? What stands between who you are and who you're becoming? What stands between where you are and where you're going? What if we could accept the fact that not everyone is going to be happy about us facing our giants? What if we could choose our battles this week and not try to fight on all fronts? What if we could change the soundtrack in our head today from what they say and maybe even from what we say to what God says? What if we could stop trying to be someone else, to fight like everyone else? What if we started being ourselves, fighting the way God's outfitted us to fight? What if our takedown, what if your takedown was to start today? Father, I just pray for those watching online, and I ask that somehow in all of this, they would hear just what they need to hear. Lord, even if it's just some one thing, that it would stand out to them even now as I'm praying. And Lord, that they could take it to heart and that they could think on it and pray on it and seek to apply it to their lives this week. Lord, our giants are bigger than us, but they're not bigger than you. In that sense, you are the only giant in our story. And so we're asking you to fight in our behalf. We're asking you to give us that spiritual armor with which we can fight any and all the battles in our lives. And we just pray that our takedowns could begin. Lord, that throughout Sola Church and even others who may be watching online or sharing this with a wider audience, that we could all begin to see the victories that you're wanting to see in our lives. And we'll give you the thanks for it. Amen.
And now it's time to fill out a connection card.
Yeah, so you'll see a link in the chat feed. You can always go to the website, solachurch.life, and click contact. That's where the connection card lives. There are bubbles. This is your way of letting us know that you were here today, providing us with contact information so we can keep you posted going forward. But you can also click a bubble if you want to participate in a virtual small group. You can click a bubble if you want to join the launch team. Like, people can do that today. I mean, even without going to the startup party, people can, right now, they can join the launch team. And also you can click, if you want more information about the startup parties. But if you know that you want to join us at the startup party this afternoon or the one in a couple of weeks, well then just a reminder, go to the website, solachurch.life, click startup party, and then choose your date. Now, if we hear from you in the next hour or two, it'll be real easy for us to include you in today's meeting. Even worst case scenario, if it's too late for us to get the food delivered to you, we should still be able to get you the link to be in the meeting. But yeah, today or May 5th, love to have you.
And Alan, how can we help people understand how can we get the word out? I was trying not to read it. I'm so sorry.
Okay, let's try it again.
And now it's time to fill out a connection card.
Yeah, so you'll see a link in the chat feed. Of course, you can always go to our website, solachurch.life, and click contact. That's where the connection card lives. This is your way of letting us know that you attended online today. It enables us to stay in touch with you, to let you know about what's happening at Sola Church. But also there are bubbles that you can click, like if you want to participate in a virtual small group, click that. If you know right now that you want to join the launch team, you can do that. You can click that bubble. If you want to attend the startup party, whether the one this afternoon or the one in a couple weeks, then you'll want to go to its own page. So that again is on the website, solachurch.life, but click startup party and then choose either Sunday, April 18th or Wednesday, May 5th. If we hear from you in the next hour or two, we can for sure get you the link for today's meeting. Even if it's too late at that point to have the food delivered to you, which it may or may not be too late for that, but if it is, we can still get you that link if we hear from you soon.
And Alan, how can people help us get the word out about startup parties, the launch team, our in-person launch date?
Yeah, we need you. We need your help. I mean, even if it doesn't work for you to be a part of the launch team, even if you're in another part of the country or another part of the world, if you know anyone in or near West LA who you think we should connect with or who you think might want to be a part of this, then help us connect with them. You can make an introduction. You can email or message us and them and introduce us. You can tag them in one of our posts about a startup party, for example, encouraging them to check it out. You can just give them a phone call and tell them what's going on and direct them to our website. There are just so many ways, but think about who you know. You probably know people. You probably have family members, friends, people that you know through work that live in that area that might very much like to connect with us or be a part of this. So you can help us that way for sure.
Awesome. And thank you all for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.